There's something uniquely unsettling about the idea of a creepy neighbor. We're taught to think of home as a safe haven, a place where we can let our guard down. But what happens when the threat isn't a stranger lurking in the shadows, but someone living just a few feet away? Someone who knows your routines, who can watch you from their window, who can blend in with the background of your daily life until, one day, you realize you've been watched all along. Tonight I'll share 3 real stories of neighbors who crossed the line from odd to outright terrifying. These aren't urban legends or campfire tales. These are true accounts, sent in by people who never expected the person next door to become the source of their nightmares. Let's start with a story from a listener named Emily, who moved into her first apartment after college. She was excited, nervous, and ready to start her adult life. The building was old but charming, with creaky floors and big windows that let in the morning sun. Her neighbors seemed friendly enough, mostly young professionals and a few older residents who'd lived there for decades. But there was one neighbor who stood out from the start, a man named Mr. Dwyer, who lived directly across the hall. Mr. Dwyer was in his late 50s, with thinning gray hair and a habit of wearing the same faded blue bathrobe, no matter the time of day. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his voice was soft and almost apologetic, as if he was sorry for taking up space. Emily didn't think much of him at first. He seemed harmless, just a little odd. But that changed one night, about a month after she moved in. It was a Friday, and Emily had invited a few friends over for a movie night. They laughed, ordered pizza, and stayed up late, the way you do when you're young and the world feels safe. Around midnight, her friends left, and Emily started cleaning up. That's when she heard a soft knock at her door. She opened it to find Mr. Dwyer standing there, clutching a mug of tea. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry to bother you," he said quietly. "I just wanted to ask if you could keep the noise down." "The walls are thin, you know," Emily apologized, feeling a little embarrassed. She promised to be quieter in the future. Mr. Dwyer nodded, but before he turned to leave, he glanced past her into the apartment, his eyes lingering on the empty pizza boxes and the pile of blankets on the couch. "Looks like you had a fun night," he said, almost wistfully. Emily closed the door, feeling a chill she couldn't quite explain. She brushed it off as awkwardness, the kind that comes from living in close quarters with strangers. But over the next few weeks, she started to notice things that didn't add up. Sometimes when she left for work in the morning, she'd find her doormat slightly askew, as if someone had moved it. Once she came home to find her mail stacked neatly on her doorstep, even though she hadn't checked it yet that day. And every so often, she'd catch a glimpse of Mr. Dwyer's face in the peephole, as if he was watching her leave. One night, Emily woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. She checked the clock, 17 a.m. The footsteps stopped outside her door. She held her breath, listening. After a few minutes, she heard the soft scrape of something against her door, then silence. The next morning, she found a small, folded note slipped under her door. "Dread, you looked beautiful last night. I hope you slept well." Emily's heart pounded as she read the note. She tried to convince herself it was a prank, maybe from one of her friends. But deep down, she knew it was from Mr. Dwyer. She started double-locking her door, keeping her curtains closed and avoiding the hallway as much as possible. But the notes kept coming, compliments on her outfits, comments about her friends, even references to conversations she'd had on the phone. It was clear he was listening, maybe even watching. She went to the building manager, who promised to have a word with Mr. Dwyer. For a while, things seemed to calm down. The notes stopped, and Emily started to relax. But then, one night, she came home late from work to find her apartment door slightly ajar. She froze, her mind racing. Had she forgotten to lock it? Was someone inside? She called a friend who stayed on the line as Emily slowly pushed the door open. The apartment was dark, but nothing seemed out of place. She checked every room, every closet, every corner. Everything was exactly as she'd left it, except for one thing. On her pillow was a single fresh daisy, and a note that read, "I just wanted to see you up close." That was the final straw. Emily called the police, who questioned Mr. Dwyer but couldn't prove he'd done anything illegal. She broke her lease and moved out within a week, leaving behind the apartment she'd once been so excited to call home. To this day, she wonders how many times he'd been inside her apartment, watching her while she slept. That's the thing about creepy neighbors. They don't always start out as threats. Sometimes they're just faces in the hallway, people you nod to in passing. But all it takes is one moment, one crossed line, to turn your safe space into a place you can't wait to escape. If Emily's story left you uneasy, the next one might make you rethink every friendly wave you've ever given to the person living next door. This story comes from a listener named Marcus, who grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knew each other by name. The kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and kids rode their bikes until the streetlights flickered on. But even in the safest neighborhoods, darkness can find a way in. Marcus was 16 when the new neighbor moved in. The house next door had been empty for months, its lawn overgrown and windows dusty. Then one Saturday morning, a moving truck appeared, and by the afternoon a man named Mr. Harlan was unloading boxes. He was in his early 40s, tall and thin, with a sharp jawline and a habit of wearing sunglasses, even on cloudy days. He didn't introduce himself to anyone, just nodded when people waved and kept to himself. At first, Marcus didn't think much of it. Not everyone wants to be part of the neighborhood barbecue. But his mom was bothered by how Mr. Harlan never seemed to leave the house. No car ever pulled into the driveway. No packages were delivered. And the only time anyone saw him outside was late at night, watering the lawn under the glow of a single porch light. One evening, Marcus was taking out the trash when he noticed Mr. Harlan standing at the edge of his yard, staring up at the sky. Marcus hesitated, then called out a greeting. Mr. Harlan turned, his sunglasses reflecting the porch light, and nodded without a word. Marcus felt a chill but shrugged it off. Maybe the guy was just shy. But then strange things started happening. Marcus's dog, a friendly golden retriever named Max, began barking at the fence that separated their yards. Every night, like clockwork, Max would stand at the back door, growling and scratching to get out. When Marcus let him into the yard, Max would run straight to the fence, barking furiously at the darkness on the other side. Marcus tried to see what was setting him off, but there was never anything there, just the shadowy outline of Mr. Harlan's house. One night, Marcus's mom woke him up, her voice trembling. She'd heard footsteps outside her window. Marcus grabbed a flashlight and crept outside, his heart pounding. He scanned the yard, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. That's when he saw it. A figure standing just beyond the fence, motionless, watching the house. Marcus froze, the flashlight trembling in his hand. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there as if waiting for something. Marcus called out, his voice barely more than a whisper. The figure turned and disappeared into the shadows. Marcus ran back inside, locking every door and window. The next morning he found muddy footprints leading from the fence to the side of the house, then back again. He told his mom, who called the police. They came, took a report, and promised to keep an eye on the neighborhood. But nothing changed. Over the next few weeks, Marcus started noticing other things. Lights flickering on in Mr. Harlan's house at odd hours. The faint sound of music drifting through the night, sometimes accompanied by what sounded like muffled voices. Once Marcus saw Mr. Harlan standing in his window, staring directly into Marcus's room. He closed the blinds, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Then one night, everything escalated. Marcus woke up to the sound of Max barking, louder and more frantic than ever before. He rushed downstairs and saw Max at the back door, fur bristling, teeth bared. Marcus flipped on the porch light and stepped outside, calling for Max to calm down. That's when he saw the gate to the yard was open, swinging in the wind. He walked over, his skin crawling. As he reached the gate, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A pile of bones, neatly arranged in a circle, right in the middle of the yard. They looked like animal bones, small and white, picked clean. In the center of the circle was a single black feather. Marcus backed away, his mind racing. He called his mom, who called the police again. This time they took it more seriously. They questioned Mr. Harlan, who denied knowing anything about the bones or the open gate. But the officers searched his yard and found more bones, buried in shallow holes along the fence line. The police couldn't prove anything, but the neighborhood was never the same after that. Parents kept their kids inside after dark, and Marcus's family installed security cameras around the house. Max refused to go near the fence, and Marcus started sleeping with his door locked. A few months later, Mr. Harlan moved out as suddenly as he'd arrived. The house sat empty again, the grass growing tall and wild. But Marcus never forgot the feeling of being watched, or the sight of those bones in the moonlight. Sometimes late at night, he'd catch a glimpse of movement in the shadows and wonder if Mr. Harlan was still out there, watching from somewhere just beyond the edge of the light. It's easy to think of neighbors as harmless, as just another part of the scenery. But sometimes, the scariest monsters are the ones who live right next door, hiding in plain sight. If you're still with me, you might be glancing at your own windows, wondering about the people who live just a wall or a fence away. The last story tonight comes from a listener named Priya, whose experience with a neighbor started as a simple misunderstanding and spiraled into something much darker. Sometimes the scariest stories aren't about what you see, but about what you can't explain. About the slow, creeping realization that someone is obsessed with you, and you have no idea why. Priya moved into her townhouse after a tough breakup, hoping for a fresh start. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly families and retirees, with well-kept lawns and friendly faces. Her unit was at the end of a row with only one direct neighbor, a woman named Mrs. Callahan, who was in her 70s and loved to garden. On the other side was a small patch of woods, and beyond that a row of older homes. Priya liked the privacy, the sense of space. She spent her evenings on the back patio, reading or listening to music, feeling like she'd finally found a place to breathe. It started with small things. A light in the woods that flickered on and off at odd hours. The sound of footsteps crunching through leaves when she took out the trash at night. Once she found a cigarette butt on her patio table, even though she didn't smoke. She mentioned it to Mrs. Callahan, who shrugged and said the neighborhood kids sometimes cut through the woods. Priya tried to brush it off, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. One night, she was sitting on her patio, scrolling through her phone, when she heard a voice, soft, almost a whisper, coming from the trees. She froze, listening. The voice was low, muttering words she couldn't quite make out. She stood up, heart pounding, and called out, "Hello." The voice stopped. She waited, but there was only silence and the distant hum of traffic. She went inside, locked the door, and told herself it was just her imagination. But the next morning she found a note taped to her back door. The handwriting was shaky, almost childlike. It read, "You look lonely. I can keep you company." Priya's stomach dropped. She called the police, who took the note and promised to patrol the area more often. For a while, things were quiet, but then the gifts started appearing. First, it was a single red rose left on her doorstep. Then a small box of chocolates still wrapped with a note that said, "For you." Priya was unnerved, but there was nothing overtly threatening about the gifts. She installed a security camera above her door, hoping to catch whoever was leaving them. The footage showed nothing but shadows and the occasional stray cat. Then one night, Priya woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing. It was a notification from her security camera, motion detected at the back door. She opened the app and watched, breath held, as a figure appeared on the screen. The person was tall, wearing a hooded jacket, their face hidden in shadow. They stood at her door for several minutes just staring, before turning and disappearing into the woods. Priya called the police again, but the footage was too grainy to identify anyone. She started sleeping with the lights on, her phone clutched in her hand. She stopped using the patio, kept her curtains closed, and avoided going out after dark. But the gifts kept coming, flowers, candy, even a small stuffed animal. Each one was accompanied by a note, the messages growing more desperate. "Why won't you talk to me? I see you every night. Don't be afraid." One evening, Mrs. Callahan knocked on Priya's door, her face pale. She said she'd seen someone standing in the woods, watching Priya's house. The police increased their patrols, but the visits didn't stop. Priya felt trapped, her home no longer a sanctuary but a cage. The final straw came on a rainy night in October. Priya was in bed, trying to sleep, when she heard a tapping at her window. She sat up, heart racing, and saw a face pressed against the glass. A man, his eyes wide and unblinking, rainwater streaming down his cheeks. He mouthed something she couldn't hear, then vanished into the darkness. Priya moved out the next week, breaking her lease and leaving behind the life she'd tried so hard to rebuild. The police never caught the man, and the gifts stopped as suddenly as they'd started. Sometimes she wonders if he found someone else to watch, someone else to haunt. But mostly she just hopes she'll never see his face again. Creepy neighbors aren't always the people you expect. Sometimes they're the ones who seem invisible, who slip through the cracks, who watch from the shadows and wait for the perfect moment to make themselves known. So tonight, before you go to sleep, maybe take a second look at the house next door. You never know who might be watching.